The plane touched down with a gentle bump and a familiar sigh of rubber on tarmac. Out the window, the late afternoon sun painted the small regional airport in warm, golden light. For the man in Seat 2A, this was a welcome sight. He was a man used to bustling terminals in Washington, D.C., New York, and Los Angeles, surrounded by security details and flashing badges. This trip was different. This trip was quiet. He was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But in that moment, he was just a tired man coming home from a long week. He had insisted on traveling alone, a rare chance to clear his head. The meetings had been tense, full of big decisions and weighty conversations. All he wanted was to get to his car, drive the familiar roads to his sister's house for a family dinner, and forget about the weight of his title for a few precious hours. He stood up, a tall man with a build that spoke more of long hours at a desk than a gym, though he carried himself with a quiet steadiness. He wore a simple, dark blue polo shirt and a pair of comfortable, charcoal-colored travel pants. His only luggage was a single, well-worn leather carry-on bag. He liked the simplicity of it. No entourage, no fuss. Just him as he walked down the jet bridge and into the terminal. He took a deep breath. The air here smelled different. It wasn't the recycled, tense air of the capital or the frantic energy of a big city FBI field office. It smelled of floor cleaner, cheap coffee, and a faint hint of jet fuel. It was ordinary. He loved ordinary. He moved with the small crowd of passengers towards the main concourse. His eyes, a sharp, observant brown, scanned the area out of lifelong habit. They noted the young family struggling with strollers, the businessman already shouting into his phone, the two airport maintenance workers joking by a water fountain. And then his gaze settled on two uniformed police officers, standing near the entrance to the baggage claim area. They weren't airport security. They were city police, their uniforms bearing the patch of the local municipality. The older one, a sergeant, had a thick neck and a face that looked like it was permanently set in a mild frown. He was leaning against a pillar, his arms crossed, watching the stream of people with a bored, yet predatory, patience. The younger one beside him stood straighter, eager, his eyes darting around, trying to mimic his partner's air of authority, but not quite pulling it off. The director's path took him right past them. He gave a small, polite nod, the kind any civilian might offer an officer. He wasn't trying to be the director. He was trying to be invisible. Just as he was about to pass, his sharp ears picked up a low mutter from the sergeant. The officer's eyes were fixed on a young man across the hall. The young man was waiting for someone, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, tapping on his phone. The sergeant said something to his partner, a comment the director couldn't fully hear, but the tone was clear, a tone of lazy suspicion based on nothing but a look. The director felt a familiar, professional disappointment. He'd spent a career fighting that kind of lazy thinking. But this wasn't his city, not his jurisdiction. He was off the clock. He kept walking. 3 steps later, the voice stopped him. "Hey, you." The director paused, thinking the call was for someone else. He glanced back. The sergeant had uncrossed his arms and was pointing a thick finger directly at him. "Yeah, you. Come here." The director turned fully, his polite mask still in place, but his mind was now fully alert. This was unusual. "Can I help you, officer?" "Let's see some identification," the sergeant said, his voice flat. It wasn't a request. It was an order tossed out like trash. The younger officer moved to stand slightly to the side, his hand resting lightly on his belt. The director remained calm. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice even. He could feel the eyes of other passengers starting to flick towards them. "The problem," the sergeant said, taking a step closer, "is I asked for your ID? Now, unless you want this to get difficult, you'll comply." The words hung in the air. Unless you want this to get difficult. It was a power play, pure and simple. The director felt a cold anger begin to push aside his tiredness. This wasn't about security. This was about a man in a uniform wanting to prove he was in charge. He reached slowly for his back pocket. "My identification is federal officer," he said, his tone dropping, becoming more formal. It was a warning, carefully laid. "I suggest you call your supervisor before we proceed." But the sergeant wasn't listening. He saw a man who didn't immediately jump, who dared to speak in a calm tone. And in the sergeant's world, that was a challenge. As the director pulled out a simple black leather credential case, the sergeant snatched it from his hand. He flipped it open, his eyes glancing at the gold shield and the photo ID card for less than a second. A snort escaped him. He didn't read the title. He didn't look at the name. He saw what he expected to see. A fake FBI badge? He sneered, a ugly grin spreading on his face. He held the case up for his partner to see. "That's a new one. Pretty good quality. I'll give you that. You get this online?" The younger officer chuckled nervously, looking from his sergeant to the director. The director's calm finally cracked, not into anger, but into a chilling, absolute stillness. "That badge and identification are genuine, Sergeant. You are holding the credentials of the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the last time, call your supervisor or the local FBI field office. Now." The sergeant's grin faded, replaced by a flush of irritation. This guy was sticking to his story, and doing it in a voice that was too confident, too cold. It made him look foolish in front of his rookie. His own authority was now on the line. "Yeah, and I'm the president," the sergeant said, snapping the credential case shut and stuffing it into his own pocket. "You're under arrest for impersonating a federal officer. Turn around. Hands behind your back." The words were surreal. The director stood motionless for a heartbeat, the reality of the situation crashing down. He was being arrested. In an airport. For being himself. The rookie officer, seeing his chance to act, stepped forward. "Sir, turn around, please." His voice wavered slightly. The sergeant pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt with a sharp, metallic rattle. The sound was final. It was the sound of the ordinary evening shattering completely. He didn't wait. He took the director's arm and turned him roughly. The director, a lifetime of training screaming at him to resist, to declare, to fight, did none of it. A deeper instinct took over the instinct to let the situation play out, to witness it completely. He knew, with a terrible certainty, exactly how this would end. But he had to go through it to get there. The cold steel closed around his wrists with a definitive click. The sergeant tightened them, more than necessary. The familiar weight, a weight he knew so well from the other side, now felt alien and heavy on his own arms. "You have the right to remain silent," the sergeant began, his voice reciting the words by rote as he placed a firm hand on the director's shoulder. He started to guide him, not towards a private office, but directly through the main concourse, towards the public exit and the patrol cars outside. It was a perp walk. A public humiliation. Passengers stopped and stared. Phones were raised, not to call for help, but to record. The man in the simple polo shirt, his hands cuffed behind his back, was marched past the coffee stands and the newsstands. His face was a mask, but inside, a storm was raging. A storm of fury, of disbelief, and a profound, weary sadness for a system that allowed this small, stupid act of power to happen. He kept his head up, his eyes fixed on the automatic doors ahead, glowing with the evening light. Beyond them was not just the parking lot, but the point of no return for the man walking behind him, smugly guiding him by the arm, unaware that he was holding a lit match over his own career, his own life. The walk to the car was only 50 yards. But in those 50 yards, everything changed. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and the cool evening air hit his face. It was a sharp contrast to the stuffy, recycled atmosphere of the terminal. For a split second, it felt good. Then the reality of the handcuffs, biting into his wrists, snapped back. The sergeant's grip on his arm was firm, almost pushing. They walked across the short stretch of sidewalk towards a plain, unmarked sedan parked in a no-parking zone. The rookie officer hurried ahead to open the rear passenger door. The sounds of the airport, the distant roar of an engine, the hum of a baggage cart felt strangely distant, like he was hearing them from underwater. His own breathing, however, was very loud in his ears. He focused on it. In, out, slow, calm. It was a technique he'd learned decades ago, a way to keep the mind clear when the world was spinning. Watch your head, the sergeant said, not as a courtesy, but as a command. He placed a heavy hand on top of the director's head and guided him down into the back seat of the car. It was a practiced move, one the director himself had done countless times. The feeling of being on the receiving end was a hollow, sinking sensation. The vinyl seat was cold through his shirt. The door slammed shut. The sound was final, heavy, sealing him in. The world outside the window, the airport, the freedom, the normality, was now just a picture behind thick safety glass. He watched through the window as the two officers stood by the trunk of the car. The sergeant was talking, gesturing with his hands. He was probably explaining his brilliant catch to the younger cop. The rookie was nodding, looking back at the car with a mix of awe and nervousness. He was learning a lesson today, the director thought, just not the one his trainer intended. Then the sergeant turned, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. The car dipped with his weight. He adjusted the rearview mirror, and for a brief second, his eyes met the director's in the reflection. There was no apology there, no doubt, just a bland sort of satisfaction. The job was done. A problem was secured. The sergeant started the car. The engine came to life with a low rumble. He reached for the radio microphone, clipped to the dashboard. Dispatch, this is Sergeant 41. I'm 10 to 15 with one male subject. Charge is felony impersonation of a federal officer. We're en route to central booking, ETA 10 minutes. A crackly voice came back. Copy that, Sergeant 41. Transport approved. The sergeant hung up the mic. He pulled the car out of the parking spot and began the slow drive away from the terminal curb, joining the lane for departing traffic. They passed people hugging hello, people wheeling luggage, people completely unaware of the small, quiet drama locked in the car rolling past them. The director sat perfectly still. He wasn't thinking about his rights or his anger, though it was there, a hot coal in his chest. He was thinking about procedure, about the next step. The sergeant would have to inventory his belongings. They would find his personal cell phone. They would, by law, have to allow him a phone call. He would call his chief of staff, and then the walls would come crashing down on this man in the front seat. But that would take time. An hour, maybe more. An hour in a holding cell. An hour of paperwork filled with lies. An hour where this sergeant's version of events, stopping a suspicious man with a convincing fake badge, would become the official record, if only for a little while. The thought was intolerable. The silence in the car was thick. The sergeant seemed to feel it too. He turned on the radio. A country music station filled the space, a twangy song about trucks and heartbreak. It was almost comical. They were at a red light, waiting to turn onto the main highway that led into the city, when the sergeant's personal cell phone, sitting in a cup holder, began to vibrate and ring. It played a loud, tinny rock song. The sergeant glanced at the screen. His eyebrows went up. He fumbled for his hands-free earpiece and plugged it in, answering the call. "Chief?" he said, his voice changing. It lost its tough guy edge, becoming more respectful, slightly eager. "Yeah, I'm just leaving the airport. Got a good one. Guy trying to pass himself off as FBI. Had a real nice badge and everything." He trailed off. The director, watching him closely in the rear view, saw the man's posture stiffen. The confident set of his shoulders began to slump just a little. "What?" "No, Chief. He's right here in my car. I've got him." "Why?" A long pause. The only sound was the twang of the radio and the idle of the engine. The light turned green. The cars behind them began to honk. The sergeant didn't move. He was frozen, the phone pressed to his ear. His face, visible in the mirror, began to change. The color drained from it, leaving a waxy, pale yellow. His eyes, which had been so sure and bored, widened. They darted frantically to the mirror, locking on to the director's calm, observing gaze. "No," the sergeant whispered into the phone, the word barely audible. That's impossible. He was alone. He didn't look." Another torrent of words from the other end of the phone. The director could hear the faint, angry buzz of a voice shouting. The sergeant flinched as if struck. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'm still at the departures curb. Yes. Okay." He pulled the earpiece out. It dangled from his fingers for a second before he dropped it into his lap. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just stared straight ahead through the windshield, unseeing. The cars behind them were honking more insistently now, a chorus of frustration. Slowly, as if his body was made of stone, the sergeant turned his head. He looked over his shoulder, not into the mirror, but directly at the man sitting in his back seat. The man in handcuffs. All the blood was gone from his face. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like a man who had just looked over the edge of a very tall building and realized he was falling. The honking faded into a dull background noise. The world had shrunk to the inside of that car. The sergeant's hand moved to the gear shift. He didn't put the car in drive. Instead, he put it in park, right there in the middle of the traffic lane. The warning lights on the dashboard began to blink. He turned off the radio. The sudden silence was heavier than the music had been. With shaking hands, he undid his seatbelt. He opened the driver's door and got out. He left the door hanging open. The director watched him walk around the back of the car. His steps were unsteady, like a man who'd been on a boat for too long. He came to the rear passenger door. The director looked up at him through the window. The sergeant's face was a mask of pure, undiluted terror. It was more than fear of getting in trouble. It was the look of a man who has just seen his entire life, his job, his pension, his reputation, his freedom vanish in an instant. The sergeant's hand trembled violently as he reached for his key ring. He fumbled with it, the keys jingling. It took him 3 tries to find the small silver handcuff key. He pulled open the door. The outside sounds rushed in. He didn't speak. He couldn't seem to form words. He just leaned in, his breathing ragged. He reached for the director's cuffed hands. The click of the lock opening was soft, but in the quiet, it sounded like a gunshot. The cuffs fell away. The director brought his hands in front of him, rubbing the red marks on his wrists. He said nothing. He just waited. The sergeant stared. At the discarded handcuffs on the seat, then up at the director. His knees seemed to buckle. Not in a faint, but in a deliberate, desperate collapse. He went down on one knee, right there on the dirty asphalt of the airport roadway, between his idling police car and the line of traffic he was blocking. "Please," he choked out. The word was thick with tears that were now streaming down his face, cutting through the tough guy facade like acid. "Sir, please, I'm begging you. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I have kids. I have a family. Please, just let me fix this. Please." He was weeping openly now, his shoulders shaking. He wasn't a sergeant anymore. He wasn't an authority. He was just a man who was broken and begging. The director looked down at him. He felt no pity. The hot coal of anger was still there, but it was cold now, hardened into something else. Something like resolve. He didn't want an apology. He didn't want this man's tears. He wanted something much bigger. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady, cutting through the man's sobs. "Get up," he said. The word hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Get up. For a long moment, the sergeant just knelt there on the asphalt, as if he hadn't heard, or as if his body wouldn't obey. The tears had made clean tracks through the dust on his face. His eyes were wide, red-rimmed pools of pure panic, searching the director's face for any sign of mercy, any crack in the stone. He found none. Slowly, his limbs moving like they were rusted, the sergeant pushed himself to his feet. He swayed slightly, bracing a hand against the open car door. He couldn't meet the director's gaze anymore. He looked down at his own boots, at the oily pavement, anywhere else. The director didn't move from the back seat. He was in no hurry now. The dynamic had utterly, irrevocably shifted. The power wasn't in the handcuffs or the badge on the sergeant's chest. It was in the calm, terrible silence of the man in the polo shirt. "Give me my credentials," the director said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of an order. The sergeant flinched. His hand dove into his pocket and pulled out the black leather case as if it had burned him. He held it out, his arm trembling. The director took it. He didn't open it. He simply held it in his hand, feeling the familiar weight of it. This small object, this piece of leather and metal, was the source of all this stupidity. "Now," the director said, his eyes fixed on the broken man before him, "you will listen. You will not speak. You will do exactly as I say. Is that understood?" The sergeant nodded, a quick, jerky motion. "Yes, sir." "Close this door. Go stand by your partner at the rear of the vehicle. Do not get on your radio. Do not use your phone. You will wait. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." The director gave a single slow nod. The sergeant, moving like a puppet, closed the car door gently. He turned and walked on unsteady legs to the back of the sedan, where the rookie officer stood, utterly confused. The rookie had seen his tough, know-it-all trainer get out of the car, kneel, and weep. He didn't know why, but the chill of dread had settled deep in his own stomach. Inside the car, the director finally took a full, deep breath. He let it out slowly. The adrenaline was still there, a high-pitched hum in his veins, but his mind was now crystal clear, clicking into a cold, operational mode. He looked at the sergeant's phone, still lying in the front seat. He considered it, then dismissed the idea. He would not use that man's property. He reached into his own pocket and pulled out his personal cell phone. It was a simple, secure model. He unlocked it and scrolled to a number labeled simply OPS1. He pressed call. It was answered on the first ring. "Sir?" The voice on the other end was alert, professional, and tense. "I'm all right," the director said first, knowing that would be the foremost concern. "I am currently seated in the back of an unmarked local police vehicle at the departure curb of the regional airport. I have been detained and arrested by a local sergeant." The charge was impersonating a federal officer. There was a stunned silence on the line for a full 2 seconds. Then the voice came back, tighter now, razor sharp. "Your location coordinates, sir?" "Immediately." The director glanced at a sign outside the window. "I am at the departure curb, Terminal A, outside doors 4 and 5. The vehicle is a dark blue, unmarked sedan, local plates. The officer's name is a sergeant. His badge number is 41. There is a second younger officer with him. They are both standing at the rear of the vehicle now. We have your signal. Support is en route. ETA 4 minutes. Do you require medical?" I do not, but listen carefully. This is a volatile situation. I want a low profile. No sirens, no marked units if possible. I want the local police chief notified, but by you, not by me. Tell him his officer has the director of the FBI in custody and to get here immediately. Then I want the assistant special agent in charge from our nearest field office here. This is now a potential civil rights investigation and an internal affairs matter for their department. My priority is containment and protocol. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, sir. 4 minutes. Stay on the line. I will. The director put the phone on his knee, the line still open. He watched out the window. The 2 officers were standing like statues. The sergeant had his arms wrapped around himself, though the evening was warm. He was staring at the ground, shaking. The rookie kept looking from his partner to the car and back again, his face pale. He whispered something. The sergeant just shook his head violently, a gesture of sheer despair. The world outside continued, blissfully unaware. A family pulled up in a minivan, laughing. A couple kissed goodbye. A skycap loaded bags onto a cart. It was all so normal. It made the scene by the police car look like a strange, silent play dot. In exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the first vehicle arrived. It was a black, polished SUV with dark windows. It did not have sirens or lights. It pulled up smoothly in front of the unmarked police car, blocking it in. 2 men in dark suits got out. They were young, fit, with a focused intensity in their eyes. They scanned the area quickly, their gazes lingering on the 2 uniformed. Officers before one of them approached the director's door. He didn't open it. He made eye contact through the window. The director gave a slight nod. The agent nodded back and took up a position near the rear of the sedan, his posture relaxed, but his eyes missing nothing. 30 seconds later, 2 more cars arrived almost simultaneously. One was a marked police cruiser with the chief's insignia on the side. A man in a crisp white shirt and a peaked cap exploded from it, his face a thundercloud. The other was another dark sedan. A woman in a professional pantsuit got out, her expression grim and alert. The ASAC from the FBI field office, Doc. The chief stormed over to his 2 officers. He got right into the sergeant's face. Even through the closed car window, the director could see the man's jaw working, could see the spit flying as he unleashed a torrent of silent, furious words. The sergeant seemed to shrink, becoming smaller and smaller under the onslaught. The chief then turned and hurried to the director's car door. He composed his face into a mask of profound apology and horror. He opened the door. "Director, sir, I cannot. There are no words for how sorry I am. This is an outrage, a complete failure. On behalf of my department," the director held up a hand, stopping the flood. He looked past the chief to the ASAC, who had now approached. She met his gaze, her own full of a cold, professional anger on his behalf. "Chief," the director said, his voice quiet but cutting through the man's apologies. "This is not the time for speeches. This is the time for procedure. Your officers are to be disarmed and secured, not as a threat, but as a procedural step. They are material witnesses and subjects of an investigation. You will place them in the back of your vehicle. You will not question them. You will read them their rights. Is that understood?" The chief blinked, the script of apologies ripped from his hands. He swallowed. "Yes, sir, immediately. Do it now." The chief turned and barked orders. 2 other officers who had arrived in a second cruiser stepped forward. The scene was surreal. The rookie officer, looking terrified but resigned, quietly handed over his service weapon. The sergeant, however, seemed to crumble further as an officer he knew approached him. He was mumbling something, tears starting again. The officer had to gently take his arm to guide him. They were placed in the back of the chief's cruiser, separated from each other. They looked like two very different kinds of ghosts. Only then did the director finally step out of the unmarked car. He stood up, stretching his back. The SAC was immediately at his side. "Sir, are you sure you're all right?" she asked, her voice low. "I'm fine," he said, but he held up his wrists, showing the angry red marks from the cuffs. "Photograph these, please." "For the record." She gave a sharp nod, pulling out her phone to take quick clinical pictures. The director then turned to the scene. He looked at the chief's cruiser, where his two officers sat. He looked at his own protective detail, a solid, professional presence. He looked at the SAC, ready to execute his orders. The chaos of the arrest was over. The kneeling was over. Now, the machinery was beginning to turn. The quiet, relentless machinery of justice and consequence. It was a machine he knew very well, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that it would grind very, very fine. Standing on the curb, the cool evening air felt different now. It wasn't the air of humiliation, but the air of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped. The quiet was heavy with what had just happened, and heavier still with what was to come. His protective detail had formed a loose circle around him, not blocking him, but creating a space. They were watchful, their eyes scanning the growing crowd of airport employees and delayed passengers who were now staring. Phones still held up, sensing something major had happened, but not understanding what. The director ignored the cameras. He had a more immediate focus. He turned to the police chief, who was hovering, looking like a man waiting for a verdict. "We need to speak. Privately." "Now," the director said. His tone left no room for discussion. "Of course, sir." "My vehicle?" the chief offered, gesturing to his own marked car. "No," the director said. He pointed to the black FBI SUV that had arrived first. "There." He didn't wait for agreement. He walked towards it, the SRC falling into step beside him. The agent at the passenger door opened it for them. The director slid into the back seat. The SRC got in the other side. The chief, after a moment's hesitation, ducked and crowded into the front passenger seat, twisting around to face them. The door shut, sealing them in a quiet, plush interior. For a moment, no one spoke. The director looked at the chief. He saw a man who was frightened, not for his officers, but for his own career, for the black mark this would leave on his department. It was a familiar look. "Tell me about your sergeant," the director said. His voice flat, the chief ran a hand over his closely shaved head. 22 years on the job. A solid record. No major disciplinary issues. He's old school. You know the type." "I know the type very well," the director replied. "What was his assignment today at the airport?" "Routine presence patrol. A visibility thing. We've had some minor complaints about solicitors." "That's all." "And his training on identifying federal credentials? On protocol for detaining individuals?" The chief shifted in his seat. "It's part of the annual refresher." He would have had it. The director just stared at him, letting the silence press down. The chief finally looked away. "You heard my arrest," the director continued. "He called it in as a felony impersonation. He confiscated my credentials without properly examining them. He ignored a direct request to contact a supervisor or verify my identity through channels. He performed a public perp walk. He transported me. He was prepared to book me. This was not a mistake. This was a series of deliberate, arrogant choices." "I am not excusing it, sir," the chief said quickly, his voice strained. "Not for a second. It's indefensible. What about the younger officer?" The ASIC asked, her notebook already out. "Rookie. Less than a year out of the academy. He was paired with the sergeant for field training." The chief's shoulders slumped. He was following his training officer's lead. "That doesn't absolve him," But his role was different. The director looked past the chief, out the window at the two patrol cars where the officers sat. The rookie was just staring straight ahead, shell-shocked. The sergeant had his head in his hands. "Here is what will happen," the director said, turning his gaze back to the chief. "You will immediately place both officers on administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs investigation. You will secure all evidence, the dashcam audio from their vehicle, the dispatch recording, my credential case for fingerprints. You will write your initial report tonight, and you will send a copy to the ASAC here by midnight." The chief was nodding, desperately. "Yes, sir, absolutely." "This is not the end of your department's involvement," the director said, his words slow and precise. "The FBI's Civil Rights Division will be opening a preliminary inquiry. They will want everything. Your cooperation will be noted. Any hesitation, any attempt to soft-pedal this, will be noted more strongly. Do you understand?" The chief's face was grim. He understood completely. His department was now under a microscope. "I understand. Good." The director then looked at his SAC. "I want you to take my statement here, tonight. I also want you to personally oversee the collection of any civilian phone footage from this incident. Reach out to airport security for their cameras. We need the complete picture." "Already on it," she said, tapping notes into her phone. "We'll need to get you to a proper facility, sir, for a medical check and—" "No," he interrupted. "No medical. I am not a victim. I am a witness and the head of the agency investigating this. Take my statement here. Then I am going home." He saw the protest form on her face, the professional concern. But she saw the look in his eyes and nodded. "Yes, sir." The meeting was over. The chief scrambled out of the SUV, already barking orders into his radio. A man trying to show he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. The director and the SSC stayed in the car for another 20 minutes. He gave his statement, cool, factual, and detailed. He recounted every word, every gesture. He described the feel of the handcuffs. He did not mention the kneeling. That felt like something apart, something too raw and human for the official record. That was for the internal report, maybe. Or for no one at all. When they were done, he got out. The scene was being processed like a crime scene. Technicians were already at the unmarked sedan. The two officers were gone, taken to the station for processing. His lead security agent approached. "Sir, we can take you home. Or to the office, if you prefer." "Home," the director said. He was suddenly, overwhelmingly tired. It was a deep fatigue that went right into his bones. They drove in silence. He watched the city lights blur past, but he didn't really see them. He saw the sergeant's face in the rearview mirror, the moment the arrogance had melted into terror. He saw the young rookie's confused eyes. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his deputy director. It read simply, "Heard. Whole building is standing by. Let me know what you need." He didn't reply. He put the phone away. They pulled up to his building, a quiet, secure complex. His detail did a perimeter check. Everything was normal. His ordinary life was still here, untouched. As he got to his door, the lead agent spoke. "Sir, if you need anything tonight, anything at all, we'll be right outside." The director nodded. "Thank you." He went inside. The familiar silence of his apartment greeted him. He dropped his leather bag by the door. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and drank it slowly. Standing by the sink, he looked at his reflection in the dark window. The man in the polo shirt looked back, older, weary. The anger was still there, but it had settled. It wasn't a hot rage anymore. It was a cold, hard stone of disappointment. Disappointment in the sergeant, sure, but also in a system that produced such men, that allowed such casual, arrogant power to go unchecked until it crashed into something harder. He thought of the rookie. That young face would haunt him more than the sergeant's. The sergeant was an end product. The rookie was a beginning. What lesson had he learned today? Was it about humility and caution? Or was it about the sheer, terrifying power of a badge you didn't recognize? The director finished his water. He placed the glass carefully in the sink. The work was just beginning. The reports, the inquiries, the meetings. The calls from journalists that would start tomorrow. The political fallout. The internal reviews. But for tonight, it was over. He had walked into the airport, a man wanting peace, and he had walked out the center of a storm. And all he had wanted was a quiet dinner with his family. He went to his bedroom, the weight of the day finally descending on him fully. He knew he wouldn't sleep. He would lie in the dark and replay those 50 yards from the terminal doors to the car. The click of the cuffs, the sound of a grown man weeping on asphalt. And he would think about how, in the end, the most powerful man in the room had been the one in the back seat, saying nothing at all. The quiet of his apartment was a solid thing. It pressed against his ears after the chaos of the airport. He stood for a long time in the dark living room, not turning on any lights. The city's glow through the windows painted the furniture in soft, blue-gray shapes. He was home, but he didn't feel the relief he'd craved just a few hours before. His phone, set to silent, began to light up on the kitchen counter. He could see the screen flashing calls from his deputy, from the office of the Attorney General, from numbers he knew belonged to high-ranking officials. The machine was waking up. He ignored them all. For this moment, they could wait. His eyes went to his hands. In the dim light, he could just make out the faint, pink lines on his wrists. They didn't hurt, but they were a mark, a receipt, proof that the unthinkable had actually happened. He thought about the sergeant. Not the kneeling, begging man, but the man he was before. The man with the bored, confident sneer, the one who made a snap judgment and chose, at every single point, to escalate. He thought about that man going home to his family for 22 years, wearing that uniform, carrying that attitude. How many times had it been smaller? A needless ticket written with a little too much pleasure. A rough word during a stop. A young person intimidated just because they could be. 1,000 tiny cuts of authority, never challenged, until tonight, when he finally ran into a wall. He couldn't see. The director wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about cancer. A rotten attitude in a position of power was like a cancer. If you didn't cut it out, it spread. It taught the rookie. It poisoned the public's trust. It made the job harder for every good officer who put on the badge with the right intentions. He finally moved. He walked to his study, a small room lined with books. He turned on a single lamp, a warm pool of light on his desk. He sat down, the old leather chair sighing under his weight. He opened a drawer and took out a simple yellow legal pad and a pen. He didn't turn on his computer. This was for thinking. At the top of the page, he wrote a single word: procedure. He began to write, not in full sentences, but in fragments, thoughts tumbling out. Airport patrol protocol. Federal credential verification. Mandatory call to supervisor. Refresher training. Practical, not just video. Field training officers. Evaluation of judgment, not just technical skill. Public detention. Sensitivity, discretion. The perp walk is punishment. His pen paused. He thought of the young rookie. He wrote, the follower's responsibility. When does obedience become complicity? Academy training on ethical intervention. How to challenge a senior officer. He sat back, looking at the words. This was the translation. This was how you turned a personal, humiliating incident into something the Bureau could use. Into a lesson. Into a change. The anger had to fuel this, not an explosion. His secure line, the red phone on his desk, rang. This one he couldn't ignore. He picked it up. Yes. It was his deputy director. "Sir, we have a situational report. The local EA has both officers in interview rooms. Their union reps are there. The chief is cooperating, but he's scared. The press is starting to sniff. A few videos from the airport are popping up on social media, but they're grainy. No clear audio. They just show a man in cuffs. What's the narrative?" The director asked, his voice all business. "The local department is trying to frame it as a regrettable misunderstanding during a proactive patrol. They're hoping to keep it internal. That's not going to happen." The director said flatly, "We issue a statement tonight from my office." "Sir? Are you sure?" "We could let the Office of Public Affairs handle it tomorrow. Craft something." "Tonight," the director repeated. "Short, factual, no adjectives. We say that I was detained by local officers at the regional airport. That the matter is under review by the department's Internal Affairs Division, with the FBI's Civil Rights Division monitoring. That we have full confidence in the investigative process. Period." There was a pause on the other end. The deputy understood. It was a nuclear option, in its own way. By putting his own name on it, by confirming it himself, the director was taking control of the story. He was making it too big to be swept under a rug as a misunderstanding. He was also, silently, putting his own credibility behind the idea that this was serious enough for a federal civil rights look. It would terrify the local department. It would make headlines. "I'll have a draft for you in 10 minutes, the deputy said. "Good." He hung up. The director looked back at his notepad. He added one more line. The power of transparency. He knew what tomorrow would bring. The shouting headlines. The talking heads on news channels arguing about police power and accountability. The awkward, careful statements from politicians. The sergeant would become a symbol. So would he. He would be painted as either the victim of a biased system or as a powerful man throwing his weight around. The truth, as it always was, would be Messier and stuck in the middle. His personal cell phone lit up. A text, not a call. It was from his sister. Saw the news alert. "Are you okay? We're here. Dinner's cold, but we're here." A simple, human anchor in the storm. He felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with handcuffs. He typed back, "I'm okay. Explain tomorrow. Give the kids a hug." He put the phone down. The fatigue was winning now, a deep mental exhaustion. But his mind kept circling back to the curb, to the moment the car door had opened. The sergeant had begged for a personal mercy. "Let me fix this." But you couldn't fix this by pretending it didn't happen. The only way to fix something this broken was to examine it piece by painful piece in the light. To use it as a blueprint for what not to do. The sergeant had asked for forgiveness. What he was going to get, what he needed to get, was consequence. Not for punishment's sake, but so the next rookie, the next sergeant, might think twice. The draft statement came through. It was perfect, dry, clear, and explosive in its simplicity. He approved it with a single keystroke. He stood up, his bones aching. He walked to the window. The city slept, or tried to. Down there, in a precinct station, 2 policemen were sitting under bright lights, their lives unraveling. In newsrooms, reporters were scrambling. In government offices, people were reading the statement, their eyebrows raised. He was the center of it, and yet he felt a strange distance. The man in the polo shirt had been humiliated. The director of the FBI was now managing a crisis. But the human being in this quiet room just felt a profound sadness. Sadness for a system that failed, for the trust that was broken, and for the long, difficult road of repair that had to begin tomorrow. He finally went to bed. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He didn't see the sergeant's face now. He saw the rookie's, the young, confused eyes. That was the field where the real battle was. That was the mine that needed to be reached. The incident at the airport was over. But the work, the real work it revealed, was just beginning. And as sleep finally began to pull him under, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would not let this end with a resignation or a quiet settlement. It would end with a new page in a training manual. It would end with a case study. It would end with a legacy of change, born from a few terrible minutes on an ordinary curb. That was the only thing that could make the red marks on his wrists mean something.